types of dissonance and non-chord tones. Now there are several different types of non-chord tones. The first is passing tone, and passing tones connect two chord tones a third apart by adding the step between them, the non-chord tone between them. Neighbor notes, on the other hand, neighbor tones, are a note that is a step above an upper neighbor or below a chord tone. So, for instance, if you look at this example, the circled notes are a step above the surrounding notes, whereas if you look at this example, the circled notes are between the surrounding notes. Let's go into this in a little more detail. So, passing notes. Passing notes look like this, where you've got two consonances and then a dissonance in between them, and you're stepping in the same direction between those two consonances when you hit that dissonance. So you've got a consonance and you step up to a dissonance and then you keep stepping up again to another consonance. Or you're on a consonance and you step down to a dissonance and then you continue stepping down. So you're filling in, going in the same direction, a dissonance between two consonances. So if we come back to this example where the circled notes are the dissonant ones, notice that you are stepping up in the same direction to hit that A and to hit that C. And so it's a passing tone because you are stepping in the same direction while hitting dissonances in between two consonances. Now we can contrast that with neighbor motion. In neighbor motion, you've got a consonance that then you either step up to a dissonance and then step down back to that same consonance, or you're on the consonance and you step down to a dissonance and you step back up to the consonant. So if we look at this example again, where the circled notes are the dissonant notes, notice how in that first circled note is one step above the notes surrounding it. And so the B, which is a consonant, steps up to the circled dissonance, the C that's circled, and then it steps back down. So that's an upper neighbor. And then similarly, if you look at the second circled note, that E, the D, which is a consonant, steps up to the dissonance and then steps back down to the consonants. And so this is an upper neighbor. Now we can also talk about incomplete neighbors. Incomplete neighbors are when you step up to a dissonance and then you leap away from it. Or you leap into a dissonance and you step down to a consonance. And so it's basically a neighbor motion where one of the consonances is just cut out. That's why we call it an incomplete neighbor. And we'll see a couple of these in a second. But first, let's look at "O When the Saints Go Marching In." Now, I've highlighted in yellow the dissonances, the non-chord tones. And let's think about which are passing and which are neighboring. So this example here goes between a G major triad as the underlying harmony and a D major triad as the underlying harmony. And let's remember that a G major triad is G, B, and D, and a D major triad is D, F sharp, and A. And so if we look at that first yellow highlighted note, that C there, we would see that it steps up from the previous B, and then you step out of it to go to the D afterwards. And so it's going to be a passing because it is two steps in the same direction. Now I've put the passing tones in blue, and then the neighbor notes in red. And there's only one neighbor note in red. Down on that second line, see how the A is part of a D major triad, and then you step up to the B, and then you step back down to the A. And so that makes it a neighbor, because you could step up and then step back down. You're neighboring that A with the dissonant B. Now there's one more dissonance type, and that's the anticipation. The anticipation is when the dissonance is part of the next chord. So you have the dissonance and then you repeat it, and once you've repeated it, it becomes a consonance. So anticipations are a non-chord tone that anticipate the next harmony by arriving too early on the next harmony's chord tone. So something like this will give us an anticipation. This is the Ode to Joy again. And I've noted underneath it the triad. So B, B, C, D is harmonized by a G major triad. And so you've got ba 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 G G A B B A A. And if we look down at that A, that last A, or the penultimate A, it's not part of a G major triad. There's no A in a G major triad. but rather it anticipates the following D harmony. Because when you go B, A, the first time you hear that A, it's a dissonance, but then it repeats. And when it repeats, it becomes a consonance, because that second A is part of a D major triad. And let me just point out a couple of things that don't happen much. They're illegal in the way that people talk about melody composition. You'll find that they do happen sometimes in music, but they happen pretty infrequently. And so you shouldn't leap into a dissonance and then leap out of a dissonance. And nor should you step between two dissonances. So these are the two things that we try not to do when we write melodies. So in one of our previous videos, I showed you the non-chord tones in Do You Want to Build a Snowman? And now let's try to label them as the kind of dissonances that they are. So let's first look at the first one, the one on Snowman. Well, the B's surrounding it are consonances, and then you step down to the A, and then you step back up to the B. And so this is a lower neighbor, because the A is a dissonance, and it's a step below the two B's, which are both consonances. Now let's look at that B on the second line. That little melodic chunk there starts with a C, that's a consonant, and then you step down to the B, and then you leap away. So C is consonants, you step to the B, and then you leap away. This is our incomplete lower neighbor, because the dissonant B is a step below the previous chord tone. So it's acting like a neighbor because it's a step below, but then it's incomplete because it doesn't go back up to the C. And then on that last line, you've got a situation where the we used is a D that's a consonant, it's part of a G major triad, and then used to, the C is a dissonance, it's not part of a G major triad, then you step down to B, which is a consonance, and then best is C, it's a dissonance again, and then back up again to the D. So step down to the dissonance, step down to a consonance, and then you're stepping back up. These are all passing tones because the C's are non-chord tones, and they are between two chord tones, D and B, and you're stepping at each, stepping in the same direction to go through that C down to the B, and then step through the C back up again to get to the D. So to review, we label dissonances by how they're anchored to surrounding consonances. If it fills in a third, if you're stepping in the same direction, it's passing. If it's right below a consonant pitch, it's a lower neighbor. If it's right above a consonant pitch, it's an upper neighbor. And for neighbors, the consonant pitch can be before or after or both, depending on whether we're talking about an incomplete or complete neighbor. And if it arrives too early for the next harmony, it's an anticipation. Chord tones are notes that are part of the harmonizing chord. Remember, we're calling these consonances. And then arpeggios are disjunct motions that use only chord tones. They outline a chord.